Something that happened in Nairobi, Kenya, that is truly a breakthrough for our movement. Take it away. What happened?
Hi, Jane. Thanks so much for having me on. This week, we really saw a monumental milestone in the animal protection movement, which was that the UN Environment Assembly, which met this week on Wednesday, passed for the first time a UN resolution talking about animal welfare. And the resolution is on the relationship between animal welfare, the environment, and sustainable development. And it's tremendously important. It talks about the importance of animal welfare. It asks for the Environment Program to do more research into these issues and to work with other bodies as well.
And Leah Garces, who is the head of Mercy for Animals, was there. Here is her reaction when that announcement was made.
I'm just standing outside of the closing plenary at UNEA, and I have some great news. The resolution on animal welfare has just passed by consensus, meaning everyone agreed to it and its principles, and finally animal welfare will have a home in the United Nations, and the nations of the world have agreed that animal welfare is an issue of importance. So we're off to celebrate.
So break it down for us. Why is this so significant?
This is really significant because animal welfare is an issue which hasn't been getting talked enough in international bodies like the UN Environment Program or the UN for a long time. And this really brings it onto the agenda because the links it has with critical issues, it's something that's intrinsically important, but it's also so deeply linked with sustainable development and the environment that those issues are things that suffer as well when it isn't talked about. And that's something that's changing now.
Well, let me ask you this. The United Nations has been criticized for not doing enough about animal agriculture's impact on climate. We know that back in 2016, they published a report called Livestock's Long Shadow that said that livestock is responsible for more greenhouse gases than all transportation combined. And then you had some scientists from the World Watch Institute who came out and said, no, it's even worse than that. Animal agriculture is responsible for 51% of greenhouse gas emissions. And they debated back and forth for years. And then ultimately, the United Nations settled on animal agriculture is responsible for 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, which critics have said is a wild understatement that doesn't include many, many factors, and that essentially condemns us to not address one of the major, if not the major cause of climate change. What's your reaction to those who might not trust that the United Nations will do an accurate job because of all the influences, the political pressures, the economic pressures, the same pressures that are exerted on government officials?
I think one of the things that's really exciting about this resolution is the fact that it provides for these kinds of concerns to be brought up. And it asks for the executive director of the UN Environment Program to engage with stakeholders and countries throughout the process. But it also asks for the report that's going to be produced on these links to be circulated among all 193 member states of the Environment Assembly for peer review. And in talking to governments, we've heard that they want our input on what can make this a report effective. We know a lot of the experts and the research out there, so we're keen to provide that. And it gives an opportunity to raise any issues that that might come up with the way that the report is finally produced.
And my understanding is it's also going to address other impacts, not just greenhouse gas emissions, but for example, animal agriculture's impact on human illness, particularly pandemics. We just got news this week. The bird flu is spreading in the United States for the first time since 2020. We also heard from the New York Times front page article. It was basically didn't get the attention it deserved because of all the turmoil in the world, but that scientists have concluded that the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus did stem from the Wuhan wet market and not from other theories like a lab in the area. So will this breakthrough allow for a recognition of the negative consequences of animal agriculture, not just to greenhouse gas emissions, but to our entire quality of life on this planet?
I think the resolution opens up a huge opportunity for us to incorporate animal welfare into those considerations. And one of the things that we were so excited about in the final version of the resolution is that it didn't just talk about wildlife, which wildlife poses significant pandemic risks, but it talked about all animals. And farmed animals also pose risks in diseases they have to jump zoonotically, but also in that because they encroach upon wild areas, they lead to greater contact with wildlife. And it's the resolution, in addition for asking for a report, it also asks for UNEP to work together with the World Health Organization, among other agencies, the other two key ones being the World Organization for Animal Health and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, on these issues where animal welfare overlaps with the environment and human health.
It's great that we're talking about this, but it should be on the front page of the New York Times. It should be covered by CNN. And yet you find that mainstream media basically ignores this issue. Why? Look at the advertisers. Advertisers are meat, dairy, and pharmaceuticals primarily on mainstream media, with an occasional car commercial and insurance commercial thrown in. They're not going to look at this issue. So I applaud Mercy for Animals for doing this extraordinary work. How are you going to get this out there? How are we going to get the institutions that matter, including the media, the government, and international bodies, to recognize this impact? How long are these studies going to take? The clock is ticking. Our nonprofit did a documentary called Countdown to Year Zero that raises the issue that perhaps we only have 6 or 7 years left to acknowledge animal agriculture's impact and transition to plant-based before we could reach a point of no return environmentally.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that Mercy for Animals really focuses on and has been great at doing is getting the message out. Recently, Leah Garces and Tyler Whitley, Mercy for Animals president and director of our transformation program, were in a documentary, an op-doc that the New York Times did, for example, talking about issues in the US poultry industry. So I think it's really important that that environmental, animal protection, health, food security organizations all work really hard to get the message out there as much as possible. And in terms of this specific report, we're really hoping the priority is that this is a high quality report that accurately takes into account all the links between animal welfare, sustainable development, and the environment. But we're hoping it can be produced in time for the next UN Environment Assembly, which is scheduled for spring of 2024. So we can start really turning some of the report's findings into concrete policies.
So tell me the timeline specifically, because again, time is of the essence. The clock is ticking right now. If you've even looked at mainstream documentaries like Sir David Attenborough's Breaking Boundaries, which is a very popular documentary, once we cross certain boundaries, like wildlife extinction, there's no turning back. And we've crossed so many of those boundaries, and we continue to destroy habitat. Right here in Los Angeles, there is a misguided plan to destroy LA's last coastal wetlands, the Bayona wetlands, home to 1,700 species, including threatened and endangered species. And there is a plan that was approved by the Department of Fish and Wildlife to bulldoze the whole thing over 10 years and turn it into some kind of Disney-like park. And it's being fought in courts. But this is happening across the country and across the world. The few remaining little bits of habitat are being wiped out, primarily for animal agriculture in the Brazilian rainforest. It's animal agriculture that is the primary reason they are destroying the rainforest. They say logging, but logging is really a byproduct. They're clearing land for cattle grazing. Can you address how this report dovetails with that the ticking clock problem that we have?
Yeah, I think it's important this is produced quickly, but action can't be taken soon enough. We're already seeing things happen like extinctions, like catastrophic events, wildfires, hurricanes, flooding. And these things have already happened, and there's no way to undo them once they do. So the important thing is that we do everything we can to slow down the growth of these harmful industries, to transition to more equitable food systems, and to prevent further damage as quickly as we possibly can. And time is something that needs to be taken into account in all of the policy processes that we're looking at.
Well, we know that President Biden recently authorized $1 billion to be spent to build more slaughterhouses. And in a statement that knocked me back on my heels, said this is going to provide dignity to farmers. Au contraire, what we really need to do is transition farmers to more plant-based farming. And I know that Mercy for Animals is working very hard on that and trying to transition farmers. But I guess I want to ask you about the wall of denial. The wall of denial. I mean, there are those who say that our entire economy is based on people eating meat and then getting sick, and then the healthcare industry, the pharmaceutical industry, which has more lobbyists than any other industry in Capitol Hill, that is why we have a wall of denial. Whether you look at the TV commercials or it's everywhere. The meat, dairy, and pharmaceutical industries are intertwined. And so how are we going to break through that wall of denial? Because one of the big problems, Seb, is that these industries infiltrate institutions. They infiltrate agencies like the USDA, which is run by a former dairy industry trade group leader, Tom Vilsack. And they infiltrate the United Nations in creating partnerships. The meat industry, the dairy industry has reportedly created partnerships with various aspects of the United Nations. So that's putting the thumb on the scale.
Yeah, that's the way that these kinds of interests can get entrenched is one of the most significant barriers to making these shifts. And I think the UN resolution that we just saw, it's things like that that offer a way to start balancing out some of those with increasing in amounts of authoritative information. And this is a process that we haven't just gone through with animal agriculture. It's something that we've been seeing with the fossil fuel industry, for example, over the past few decades, where doubt about the science is being brought up, for example, and it takes continuous concerted effort to be able to overcome that. But we're seeing shifts that have happened in other spaces on public opinion on matters and increasing awareness about these issues. And it's something that needs to happen with our food system as well.
Yes, our documentary Countdown to Year Zero says we've got really now less than 6 years to wake people up about the need to transition to plant-based before we hit an ecological apocalypse. And you can see that documentary and others on our new streaming network, Unchained TV, which is an app that you can download on your phone or get on television. We are trying to wake the world up. Talking to the officials at the United Nations, is there any sense that they know? In other words, there's one thing to be completely ignorant and say, well, it's not really an issue and be wrong. There's another thing to say, we realize that animal agriculture is a much bigger problem than we've acknowledged. And we're going to try to do something about it, even though it might be politically difficult.
I think the process that we went through with this resolution gave a lot of cause for hope. In the end, 193 countries, every UN member state supported the resolution. There wasn't an objection from any state. And it wasn't like that at the start of the process. A lot of work had to go into discussing these kinds of impacts with different countries, with the UN Environment Program itself, which doesn't have a history of working on animal welfare issues. And one of the things we found, we actually had a really good experience with stakeholders in government and the international organizations being willing to listen. They come at it from a different perspective, but I think it shows that there's a lot of hope for a collaborative approach like this. And we made a lot of progress in this case, and that's something that we want to replicate.
Well, I want to congratulate you because I know how hard it is to do this kind of work, to talk to people who are, as you say, entrenched in these incredibly bureaucratic organizations where everything requires approvals and there's so many nuances and there's so much red tape. So let's recap. Nairobi, Kenya, a huge decision. Mercy for Animals was there. The president of Mercy for Animals, Leah Garces, was there on the ground. Tell us, in people terms, what is the announcement and what is the timeline?
Yeah, so the announcement is that this is something where the UN Environment Assembly, which it hasn't historically worked on animal welfare issues. It's going to incorporate these into its work with other organizations where it's relevant to the environment and human health. And it's going to put out this report, which will be, it's an opportunity for an incredibly authoritative statement that will inform leaders from around the world, the international community, and the public about these links and impacts. And it's something we want to see that report come as soon as possible.
And when do you expect it?
We're hoping for it to be done in around a year's time. I think that's that might be a realistic time frame for it. But the most important thing is that the report is done in a way that allows it to be of the highest quality and to carry the most credibility, because we want it to be something that can really influence these discussions in the right direction at international organizations and in countries for years to come.
I want to thank you, Seb Osborn. I know you're a very busy man. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us at Unchained TV. And this will be up on the app, so please download Unchained TV on your phone or your television. I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck and keep us posted.
Thanks so much. Great chatting with you.
Okay, bye.